Hello everyone, it's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. So my video ran weird on the last one. Hopefully this one does okay. There's not a lot of meat on this bone, but I do want to make a very specific point, so I'm going to try to keep this within 10-15 minutes at the most. I hope everyone is doing okay. If you guys enjoy what I'm putting down, please feel free to share, like, subscribe, and of course you can always support the Patreon or Super Cash. Donald Trump has gone to Singapore in order to meet Kim Jong-un with this idea of working through some kind of peace arrangement, peace agreement, or something. Now, personally, I don't have this idea that North Korea is going to completely denuclearize. I don't see the point in them completely denuclearizing. Any agreement that takes place has to take an agreement from the standpoint of both sides. There's no such thing, or at the very least, one-sided agreements are not necessarily fair, and oftentimes states ignore one-sided agreements, especially when it conflicts with their interests. Agreements that work in both interests are more likely to be abided by if it works in both people's interests. There used to be a implicit agreement that we may have political wranglings within the country itself, but the moment that you get beyond the shores of the country, the political wrangling to some degree stops. We all become Americans. When we're beyond our shores, we're all Americans. I say this to say, many of the people, media, for this issue, to me, this has been somewhat disheartening. Donald Trump, the Korean War has been going on for the past 56 years. An American president, whether he stumbled into it or not, ends up in peace talks. It seems that the North Korean president, ruler, dictator, overlord, whatever you want to call him, actually wants to have these talks, going so far as to destroy some of his nuclear areas or nuclear bomb sites to try to make it clear that he wants these talks. People who are in the Donald Trump's campaign, John Bolton, has gone so far as to say the essentially the Libya model, the Gaddafi model, getting them to give up their nukes or trying to get nukes, and then toppling their government. Now you can understand that if you heard this, if you are a sane, rational human being, and you heard this repugnant person with a mustache say something like this, you will be less inclined to have a conversation with that group, seeing as that might be their plans. But they still wanted to have these talks. Meaning, whether they're completely serious about it or not, I don't know. But at the very least, shouldn't you give them the chance? Shouldn't you give peace a chance? You have media personalities, especially from the standpoint of Democrats, behaving like Republicans did during the Iran deal. Not wanting the president to get a win, not wanting to get any wins on the board, and cares so much about not wanting him to get wins on the board that the higher goal of peace and the higher goal of potential denuclearization of that region gets completely ignored for political points. What do you represent? He's literally going to speak to this guy with the idea of trying to tamp down on conflicts. Real potential conflicts. Do you understand that we may have forgotten the Korean War? I guarantee you they did. We killed a fifth of their population. We bombed so much that at a certain point we just bombed the stuff that we bombed again because there was nothing else to bomb. We still have military on their shores. We still go through drills as if we're going to invade their country in addition to South Korea. Meaning working with South Korea, pretending as if we're going to invade their country. We're doing things in that part of the world that they hate and that they consider to be provocative. But the only thing the media ever shows you is this guy's setting off a bomb, and it makes it as if he's setting off a bomb for no reason. Media has had a weird way of regarding this, and so have Democrats. This is ABC News. This is, I hope this comes through. Sometimes Twitter doesn't come through really well.
That rather odd security detail he has, who runs alongside his motorcade, and outside you can see heavily armed police. They're checking vehicles here, police with machine guns down the road, and that road there is totally blocked off. And imagine for Kim Jong-un, who's used to very choreographed, controlled events back in North Korea, that this... Good morning, Robin. When the most powerful man in the world meets arguably the most dangerous, you can bet security will be tight. And that is...
Did you hear that? The most powerful man in the world meets arguably the most dangerous. Kim Jong-un is not the most powerful man in the world, so I have to assume they're talking about Donald Trump. So are they trying to say that Kim Jong-un is the most dangerous man in the world? Who has Kim Jong-un invaded? What country has he taken over? I understand he's been setting off missiles and whatnot, but who has he invaded? How on earth is he the most dangerous man in the world? This is utter nonsense. He may be a danger and threat to his own people, and I agree with you. I wouldn't necessarily want to live there. It's horrific conditions. But him being abysmal to the people who live in the country is a little bit different than him being the most dangerous man in the world. And yeah, this is the media. This is Rachel Maddow. Well, let's do Rachel Maddow first. Where is she? 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 God damn it, where is she? Right here. This is Rachel Maddow talking about Donald Trump and North Korea. I'm not going to start at the beginning because it's 8 minutes long. But this is... Listen to what Maddow's saying about this.
Anything like that at this point.
State Department spokesperson today announcing this is definitely not going to happen. We are not going to be scheduling talks. We're not even going to be scheduling talks about talks. No way. Well, then, later in the day, tonight, somewhat randomly, South Korean officials turn up outside the White House to announce not just the start of talks or even talks about talks, but they announce that the President of the United States is going to meet personally with Kim Jong-un. There have been a lot of talks about talks. There have been a lot of talks even over the years, over the decades, with North Korea about their weapons programs. What is totally unprecedented, what is brand new, is the announcement tonight that for the first time ever, a sitting U.S. president will meet himself with the dictator of North Korea. Trump and Kim Jong-un meet.
Now, the wild part about this, we prop up like 70% of the dictators on the planet. So this idea that we have some issue with dictators is nonsense. This is utter nonsense. And certainly Rachel Maddow, Rhodes Scholar, knows that this is nonsense. We deal with dictators all the time. We deal with them all the time. But she's acting like this is some big thing that we're talking to dictators. When the Saudi Arabia guy, I can't think of his name, went rummaging through the country and, all the leaders was talking to him. When he was going through the UK, the guy's a brutal dictator with a theocratic regime. No issue at all. No issue at all. Let's let him keep finish. Not to mention our other allies in that region of the world where we're propping up those dictators. There's even a thing that came out, a book that recently came out showing Obama saying, screw the Arab Spring, he prefers stability in the region. Meaning, the Arabs themselves who tried to take over their country and try to change their country into this kind of revolution, Obama was backing the Egyptian Guard in this. Just saying. Let's not pretend as if the United States doesn't have a vested interest in propping up dictators all across the planet, especially when it suits our interests in order to get resources from those countries. Let's keep going. Part of the reason and the conflict that we have all through the world now is because other people know this. Others know this.
Personally and directly, according to tonight's announcement, and planning to do so, reportedly, just a few weeks from now. Now, you might imagine another president in this circumstance. Kim Jong-un makes a request. Do you want to meet? You might think like another president in this circumstance. You could imagine a president asking himself or herself, why has no other American president ever agreed to do this? Why has no sitting American president ever met with a leader from North Korea? Why has that never happened in all the decades North Korea has existed as a nation? Why hasn't any other president ever done? Should I take that to mean that this might be a particularly risky or even an unwise move?
just because somebody has never done something is not necessarily an indication that it's a horrible idea. And you can also make the case of why hasn't North Korea and South Korea made amends for all these years? Wouldn't that fall under the same logic of something that has never taken place before? I mean, it's all, again, doing the same thing that you've always done, expecting some kind of different result. It's the definition of insanity. That being said, look who said they will be on board for meeting Kim Jong-un.
Good news and bad news for the two of you. You all are even on time, which is remarkable considering we've been going at it.
It's a testimony to you, Jim.
Well, I don't know about that. But the bad news is that all my little 5-minute things have run over. So anyhow, we'll adjust as we get there. But the amount of time is even. New lead question, and it goes 2 minutes to you, Senator McCain. What is your reading of the threat from Iran right now to the security of the United States?
My reading of the threat from Iran is that if Iran acquires nuclear weapons, possible, but have no doubt about the ultimate result of them acquiring nuclear weapons.
2 minutes on Iran. Senator
Well,
Obama.
let me just correct something very quickly. I believe that the Republican Guard of Iran is a terrorist organization. I've consistently said so. What Senator McCain refers to is a measure in the Senate that would try to broaden the mandate inside of Iraq to deal with Iran. And ironically, the single thing that has strengthened Iran over the last several years has been the war in Iraq. Iraq was Iran's mortal enemy. That was cleared away.
He's right on that point, by the way, that very specific point, that the Iraq war has strengthened Iran. He is wrong that the Iranian Guard is a terrorist organization. They're no more of a terrorist organization than our special forces are a terrorist organization. Let's keep going.
And what we've seen over the last several years is Iran's influence grow. They have funded Hezbollah. They have funded Hamas. They have gone from 0 centrifuges to 4,000 centrifuges to develop a nuclear weapon. So obviously our policy over the last 8 years has not worked. Now, Senator McCain is absolutely right. We cannot tolerate a nuclear Iran. It would be a game changer. Not only would it threaten Israel, a country that is our stalwart ally, but it would also create an environment in which you could set up an arms race in the Middle East.
You've already set off an arms race in the Middle East. Israel has nuclear weapons. The idea, all of this has everything to do with the capacity to be able to attack Iran not being able to respond. This is all about dominance. The idea that it's a game changer, it is a game changer purely from the standpoint of this kind of, it's not an arms race in the Middle East. There's already an arms race in the Middle East. Israel already has nuclear weapons. Let's keep going.
Now, here's what we need to do. We do need tougher sanctions. I do not agree with Senator McCain that we're going to be able to execute the kind of sanctions we need without some cooperation from countries like Russia and China that are, I think Senator McCain would agree, not democracies, but have extensive trade with Iran, but potentially have an interest in making sure Iran doesn't have a nuclear weapon. But we're also going to have to, I believe, engage in tough, direct diplomacy with Iran, and this is a major difference that I have with Senator McCain. This notion that by not talking to people we are punishing them has not worked. It has not worked in Iran. It has not worked in North Korea. In each instance, our efforts at isolation have actually accelerated their efforts to get nuclear weapons. That will change when I'm president of the United States.
What was Rachel Maddow's perspective when Obama said that? I mean, ultimately, you have Obama saying, I am willing to sit down and speak to North Korea, Iran, and we need to have this degree of direct diplomacy. Donald Trump is having direct diplomacy. Was Rachel Maddow against it when Obama said it, or is she now just against it because Donald Trump is doing it? Another point that I want to make, listen to Joy Ann Reid.
Wow.
Because the other response to this is, Trump had nothing to do with it. Maybe we're giving the president too much credit. This is what she's saying. She's devolving what is typically considered presidential strength and presidential impact in foreign affairs because Donald Trump is taking the lead in this particular measure. I shit you not. Let's listen to Joy Ann Reid say, maybe we're giving the president, position of the president, too much credit in the affairs to which they go by. I strongly suspect this would not be said if Obama was president of the United States and he was deciding to sit down. These people are hacks. Let's let Joanne Reed do her thing.
Trying to angle for a Nobel Prize. And by the way, let's not forget that Moon Jae-in is the driving force here, the South Korean president. Let's not cut him out and pretend that somehow Donald Trump's stumbling around is what's causing all of this. It's, there are other factors, and the president of South Korea is a huge factor. Even if he's stumbling around in the dark, but he finds the golden ticket, whether we praise that or whether or not we look at the bigger picture. But Joe, and I wonder sometimes, Joe Cirincione, whether or not we, maybe in the press, maybe just in the U.S., are falling into this default of always attempting to assign to the American president responsibility for everything that goes on in the world. He's trying to angle for a Nobel Prize. He wants to outdo Obama. There are all these other things that we can see, but we set it aside to try to assign to him some brilliant backdoor plan to make this happen, when in fact maybe the Occam's razor explanation is that maybe President Moon Jae-in and the North Korean dictator are kind of making, I don't know. I wonder if that is just a default that Americans have.
Or you are a political hack, and if this was Obama, you wouldn't have these issues, nor would you have these conversations. I wonder if we're giving the president too much credit. I wonder. We keep assigning everything to the American president. The fact that Donald Trump is president, maybe we're giving him too much credit. And she said she used the South Korean president. Well, the South Korean president. South Korean president says Trump deserved Nobel Peace Prize. What? Joanne Reed invokes the South Korean president, and the South Korean president says Donald Trump deserves the Nobel Peace Prize. Now, I think this is foolhardy and this is nonsense. Donald Trump doesn't deserve a Nobel Peace Prize. He's ramping up murders with this drone program out of eyeshot, and he's been committing these murders that the press pays no attention to and no mind to. Just because on this one specific issue he stumbled around and kind of find, as she called it, the golden ticket. But he was willing to take the golden ticket, and he was willing to actually try for something. I don't care whether it's optics. I don't care whether he just stumbled around and just ended up in it. I don't care because Kim Jong-un just kind of threw it out there that Donald Trump didn't want to be undone. I don't care the reason. A president of the United States is meeting with another foreign leader with the chance of ending a war that's been going on for 60 years. And the response to media and Democrats, for the most part, has been caustic. Utterly caustic. As opposed to cautious optimism. Democrats have taken the extra step of trying to sabotage this by putting out essentially a point plan saying he needs to abide by these items. One of those items will never take place. Will never take place. There is no context in which North Korea would denuclearize, because North Korea denuclearizing would allow North Korea to be open for attack. It would be unfair for North Korea to denuclearize in that sense, or even to have that as a provision. All of this is a process. None of this is you go there and you run roughshod over another country and tell them the things that you want. If that's the way you're looking at this, then yes, this is going to be a failure. If you're looking at this as a peace process where you're taking steps to try to tone down the conflict between these two countries and potentially end up with a path for peace and reunification, well, that's different. That's utterly different. Donald Trump is a mess. He is a reality show host. All things being equal, I would not prefer him to be the president of the United States, but he is the president of the United States. And that president of the United States, whether by hook, by crook, by folly, whatever other means that you want to use, stumbled into a conversation where he's having larger talks with a nation to which we are antagonizing, let's say it that way. Earlier, last year, he was screaming into a UN microphone calling him Rocket Man. This year, he's in talks, trying to come to some level of peace and resolution. I don't like Donald Trump, but at the very least, I will give him credit and hope that these peace talks go well. It matters more to me of the peace process than my own malice or dislike of Donald Trump himself. So, I put all these at the bottom. And by the way, Peter fucking Dow. Listen to Dow. The other response to this, can't believe Donald Trump is doing it, for one section of the Democratic Party. Another section, closely in line, maybe we shouldn't even give him credit for it, maybe we should give this more to South Korean president and China. I agree that this is China and South Korea, but the South Korean president has added Donald Trump to the mix, saying the man deserves a goddamn Nobel Peace Prize. I couldn't disagree with him more. Nevertheless, he said it, which means Joanne Reed invokes one, and the person who Joanne Reed invokes is essentially saying Donald Trump should get credit. Peter Dow is taking the perspective of North Korea is a horrible country, and because North Korea is a horrible country, Donald Trump to some degree shouldn't be talking to North Korea in this way. This is somewhat of an odd conversation. You are at potential war with this country. And not just at potential war. This country has never ended the South and North Korea war. I understand that it's a horrible country. What does that have to do with reconciliation and peace talks from the standpoint of us to them? And do you honestly believe that if we end up in some kind of larger conflict, that those people who you're calling for this kind of humanitarianism are not going to be the people who get hit by those bombs or murdered in this process, not to mention the people in Japan and South Korea that are going to be first hit from this? South Korea, I would push very hard, I would wager everything that I own, seeing as they're right there, potentially in line to take the first hit if anything takes place, would prefer reconciliation and would prefer peace, which is probably the reason why they're pushing so hard for this to take place and to just be successful. I am on board for this to be successful. I don't care if Donald Trump gets a win on the board. I would prefer there be peace in that part of the world. So, this is Dow essentially putting out all this hatred. Under Kim Jong-un, the government sharply curtails the basic liberties, including freedom of expression, religion and conscience, assembly and association. It prohibits political opposition, independent media, civil society, and trade unions. What does that have to do with the peace talks? What does that have to do with the peace talks? 2014 UN Commission of Inquiry found that the government committed gross systematic and widespread rights abuse, including extermination, murder, enslavement, torture, imprisonment, rape, forced abortions, and other sexual violence. I thought he was talking about Israel, but he's talking about North Korea. Again, what does that have to do with peace talks? I don't understand. North Korea operates secret prison camps, so do we. Sent to face torture, so do we. Starvation, rations, forced labor, fear of collective punishment is used to silence dissent. This sounds a lot like Israel, but again, he has no issue with Israel. That literally sounds like Israel and the Palestinian camps. Both of those. Peter Dow, I would wager, has no issue with Israel and Palestinian conflicts. And yet, for this particular issue, because Donald Trump is going to try to make some kind of peace, this is the issue. Look, there's a such thing as called being a patriot. Of things that matter more than just your own political machinations. This is one of those things. It is time for that particular part of the world to have some level of peace. If Donald Trump can make it work, then let him make it work. If he can't, then we're back to where we started. But there is no negative in allowing him to try. Just saying. Alright, let's see. We have 146 people here. Holy shit. You guys are supposed to be at work. The stenographers in the media don't see war but through a television. Wesley Walker Jr. That is true. That is very true. It's like from their standpoint, they're so utterly detached from the consequences and the decisions that are being made. And they ultimately just end up taking the government's word for it from government's perspective. There's a very awesome clip where Jill Stein is having a conversation with one of the stenographers on CNN. And he's like, yeah, Jill Stein makes this point of, look, of all the things that we've done, it's kind of insane that you're using this Russia hysteria nonsense in order to make these attacks. And he says, I understand that there is a wider perspective of these things, but shouldn't you take the American perspective? And what you realize is that's what's taking place from the standpoint of media. They take a specific American perspective, not realizing that that specific American perspective allows the propagation of wars. When your public can't see that the other side of the world actually has a disposition, and that disposition is actually just as valid as your own, it allows the public to support wars. They look at it through TV. That's right, Wesley Walker agreed. Let's see. You're nice and intelligent. National debt, BS, make crazy. Rob Illinois. 420 idea, O'Brien, 20 years of prison, memory implanted. 20 years of prison, memory implanted. Oh, I know what you're talking about. Like if instead of Trudy, instead of prison, if the memory of prison was implanted into the individual, would that still equate to a prison sentence? Like in your dream states, you can go through a dream state where you feel like you've been in a dream for years. You know, it's like you wake up in the morning and you have this entire thing that has taken place, and it might have taken place all within the context of a minute. What if you can do that from the standpoint of prisons? If you can implant a particular memory that the person had been incarcerated, that way you don't lose the labor power, you don't use the stuff of the person coming out of the system and everything else. What would it be, and would it be okay? I've seen, I don't know, Trudy. I've seen shows on that. That's not a bad idea for 420 though. Yeah, that's interesting idea for 420. You got me thinking about it even now. And he's going to be president for 6 more years. She's talking about Trump. I doubt that. I seriously doubt that. I was looking at polling results, where George Bush Sr. was at this time and where Donald Trump was at this time from the standpoint of polling. He's worse. Now, here's the catch. If anybody could fuck it up, it would be the Democratic Party. So you may be right, Bo, like a leopard, that he may be president for 6 more years if the Democratic Party does what I think the Democratic Party is going to try to do. So we will see. Trudy, media has a fit when Obama said he talked to Iran. Also had a fit when Trump said the nukes are not off the table. Well, the nukes thing is different than conversation. Like me saying I am willing to have a conversation with another world leader. It's a little bit different than we can potentially nuke a country. Come on, those things are different. Those things will raise eyebrows. Kalita, who knows? Let's see. Jim Hyden, save the dynasty. Vote for Chelsea Clinton's latest baby. Didn't Peter Douche have to change his name, Chuck E. Cheese? Yes, Peter Douche did have to change his name. He changed it to Peter Douche's Liaison. He changed it to Peter Douche's Liaison. After Obama got the Nobel, it seemed anyone can. Has nothing to do with peace, obviously, Krishan. So here's the thing, Chris. The people who made that decision said they regretted that decision. They gave that decision because they were trying to be dickish from the standpoint of George Bush, trying to make this exclamation point on, God damn it, thank God that maniac is out of the office. Not realizing that the person who was coming into the office was going to have a streak where 95 or 90% of the people he murdered with drones were civilians. I mean, come on. That's fucking amazing. That guy got the Nobel Peace Prize. Now, Donald Trump comes in and he ups that number by a factor of 4. Think about that. Thousands of people killed by drones under Obama. Trump ups that number. On the last year Obama was in office, he dropped 26,000 bombs. Think about the number of... That's mind-blowing. We can't pay for health care. We can't make sure people got clean water. We can't make sure people go to school. We can't make sure people get a child credit. We can't do any of that stuff. But we can drop bombs and we can pay for bombs. There seems to be a magnificent problem in the priorities here. A magnificent priority in the problems. Tomosi Young sounds kind of like us. Burn Butch Holes. Kissinger earned his Nobel Peace Prize. Nixon was going to nuke Vietnam. I don't think he was going to nuke Vietnam. He was threatening. Nixon said, I got a secret plan to get us out the war. Not telling anybody that secret plan was just more bombing. Nixon ended up going along with LBJ's plan. Now, the wild and sad part about that is that he ended up taking LBJ's plan after years of other Americans being murdered and after, like 1 million Vietnamese being murdered in that process. Nixon, when you listen to the tapes, they knew that government was going to collapse. They just wanted enough political space away from it where he wouldn't get blamed for the collapse. At a certain point, it became a moot point because of Watergate. But still. Let's see. Joshua Renshaw, Jamal, you're misunderstanding the context of Peter Doug's comments. The list wasn't a consternation of North Korea, but jealousy that Hillary Clinton would have matched the things here he had. She won. You're saying Hillary was jealous about the stuff that North Korea was doing. Ruben Garcia, Jamal, you need to look up what the Japanese government's opinion on North Korea is. They are too against North Korea and support the United States. Yes. No. I know Japan's position on North Korea. Look, they're concerned. I mean, they're concerned because North Korea has been firing missiles over their country. I don't bemoan them for being somewhat concerned in this process. My issue here is there is no military solution to North Korea. So let's stop acting like there's a military solution to North Korea. Part of our issue with North Korea is the same issue that we have with Iran getting a nuclear weapon. We can't attack them without them showing their teeth and biting us back if they have a nuclear weapon. That's what it boils down to. This is about domination. This has nothing to do with being fair. What right-wingers miss, however, is that in their goal for domination, they just create more chaos. In blowing the shit out of Iraq, you only strengthen the hand of Iran. And in trying to isolate North Korea, you've allowed them to get a nuclear weapon. They think fairness is weakness. The difference is fairness is the only thing that's going to get you peace. No justice, no peace. Any provision that tries to force North Korea to give up its weapons is going to be a loss. The Democratic Party is trying to put the kibosh on Donald Trump coming to some level of peaceful agreement by putting certain mandates on him that are somewhat impossible for him to reach. If there is a situation where Donald Trump can make some level of peace here, he should be backed up on it. And the peace process should be off the table from the standpoint of politics. I don't like Trump, but this has nothing really to do with Trump. This has everything to do with the potential to end that war that has been going on for the last 60, 70 years. So, Japan is the only country with negative population growth. War wouldn't help. DC 420 LA. Japan has a lot of odd stuff around like sex and procreation and that type of stuff. It's a little strange. Jamal, stop talking about North Korea peace boards. It's like Putin's puppet dude talking about peace in North Korea. You're being a Putin puppet by talking about peace. Now, peace deals are not meaningless if it opens North Korea a bit. As better economy will support their growing middle class. Look, North Korea has a lot of problems. And let's be honest, one of those problems has to do with the perception internally. One of the teachers who used to work at North Korea used to call her kids my little liars. She said my little liars. Because they would tell her stuff. And it would be hard to know whether they believed it or whether they were just lying. Like, for example, they would tell her the entire world speaks Korean because the entire world has agreed that the Korean was the best language. And she's like, you know that shit is not true. Why are you saying that? And it's like, but do they know that's not true? Like, it's hard to tell what do they know. It's a closed society, and in this closed society, you have this great Satan that's potentially going to attack the country because they remember that a fifth of their population was destroyed by the United States. Peace. If you're talking about something that would benefit the society, all these humanitarians, don't you believe that peace may go a long way in doing so? Come on, let's be honest. Ruben Garcia, thank you for covering all these stories. I do not support our extremely overly bloated military. Yeah. We spent $1 trillion on that. We're talking about spending another $1 trillion on the nuclearization, like updating our nuclear weapons. $15 million loss. Gone. They don't even know where it went. I did the story the other day in 2015, well, $5 trillion. Loss. No idea where it went. We're fighting for scraps just for healthcare, just for education. They're losing trillions. They're losing trillions. Ruben, yeah, it's overly bloated, to say the least. It's a jobs program. Call it what it is. It's just a gross, over the top jobs program. It's just in this case, the jobs program is building bombs and jets and bullets and missiles. Here's the catch that people never really challenge or never really dig into. We spend 4 times as much as the rest of the world for healthcare. We don't get the same degree of healthcare as they even get somewhere like Cuba. Like, from the standpoint of ranking for the United States healthcare. If I'm not mistaken, Cuba is ranking higher than the United States, dealing with this thing of access. We've lost thousands each year that have died because of not having access to healthcare, or at the very least, the way we go about our healthcare affairs. Just because people can walk in to get healthcare doesn't necessarily mean they will do so if they're going to get a bill associated with it. Just because they're going to get a bill associated with it. My point to this is, just because we spend $1 trillion on the military, just because we spend 9 times the next of the nations, many of which are our friends, it doesn't mean that you're getting a comparable amount of military, let's say, bang for your buck. Comparing it to healthcare for the moment, you dump a lot of money into something and you just assume that money is going to good ends. Why on earth would you assume that? Why? It's like saying just because priests are holy men, they're not going to be fucking kids. Well, you got another thing coming. Trudy, Obama talking to Iran and Trump refusing to take nukes off the table, both presidential, but media flipped out. No, Trudy, I disagree with you on this. If I'm president and I say, look, what we're doing isn't working, and we need to be willing to talk to our enemies because what we're doing isn't working, and the way that we're going about our affairs is going to lead to a war, a larger conflict. That's sane. That's logical. That makes sense. It's a person being rational, trying to mend issues that may lead to larger conflicts of loss of life. At a certain point, it becomes one of those things where what the president wants becomes less important and the politics takes over and war becomes somewhat inevitable. And what I mean by that is, if you look at World War I and the way that those things kind of just kicked off, where one alliance system after the next kind of pulled people into a conflict, I would make the case to you that our world order that we have right now is purely from what took place in World War I. World War I, in many respects, led to World War II. In many respects, the stuff that's taking place in the Middle East right now has to go back its origins in World War I. Talking to your enemies. Talking. Association. Trying to understand them. Trying to understand and get in their heads. What are their needs? What are our needs? How do we make amends? That's sane and rational. Saying you're putting nukes on the table is not. I'm sorry, it's not. Like, the media flips out because you're talking about nuclear weapons. Why are nuclear weapons on the table in these discussions? What are you even using those nuclear weapons for? It makes no sense. I'm saying there's a dramatic difference, Trudy, between Obama saying he's going to talk to North Korea or Iran and Donald Trump saying he's leaving nuclear weapons on the table. That makes no sense. It's like saying, you and I are going to have a talk and you and I have a disagreement, but I'm going to have my gun here. And my gun is on the table just so you know where this goes. And you're like, fuck, man, we're just talking about Pokemon. Gardenome, it doesn't matter what Trump wants regarding the United States DPRK policy. No matter how many meetings he has, it's a good step. But I don't see the United States changing the paradigm in the near future. Well, the thing is, Garden, it's a good step. I mean, it's a process. I have no expectation of Donald Trump coming back saying, I got it, peace, give me a fucking peace deal, a peace prize. I don't see that taking place. I don't. But if the President of the United States can tone down, and de-escalate the screaming in the mics of Rockin' Man and all this other stuff, it's a positive step. So yeah. Why not? They're both insane megalomaniacs. Treetop Samuelson. Both of them were born into countries and born into systems, and both of them are using the instruments to the systems to which they were given. people like to blame the individual in this case. If Obama was born into the North Korean family, would Obama behave differently? He would probably act like Kim Jong-un. If Donald Trump was born into a European country, he would probably act somebody like Boris Johnson. The leader themselves are moderated and molded based upon the country and the forces to which they're in and the things that they can have at their disposal. It's not purely the individual in the way that people like to heap all of the stuff purely on the individual. Yes, the individual makes certain decisions that allows people to get hurt or maimed or raped or broken. That's true. They do make certain decisions that allow people to be disenfranchised from voting, kicking people off the road. All that's true. But we're talking about people growing up in a particular system with a particular context that they can function in, and they exploit it to the degree they can exploit it. All countries, all leaders in all of those countries do it. This is not to excuse the behaviors of leaders in those countries. It is to explain the behaviors of leaders in those countries and to make the point that it's not purely the individual that's doing those things, that to some degree it's allowed by the society itself. I hope that makes sense. Kim Jong-un was born into that society, and he was raised knowing the powers and so forth that he has at his disposal. Not many people give up their powers. The President of the United States very rarely would say, look guys, I have too many powers in this position, so I am just going to hand those away. Plutocrats very rarely come out and say, hey, we're making too much cash, we're making too much money, so we're going to give this money back in order to get rid of poverty. Nobody, rarely, gives up their stations, whether that's in government or whether that's in private enterprise. That doesn't excuse their behavior. And again, I'm trying to make this very clear. It doesn't excuse the behavior, it just explains it. There's a difference in those things. Holy shit. Who did this? Joshua Renshaw, completely unrelated, derail super chat time. Take this here and treat yourself to a cryotherapy session. It's life-changing for general pain and inflammation. Cryotherapy? That's putting yourself in a tube, putting yourself in a frozen tube. The only thing I know about cryotherapy is where people would, like at the moment of their death. No, that's cryostasis. I don't know what cryotherapy is, Joshua Renshaw. I Jesus Christ. But Joshua, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it, man. President cannot say nukes are off the table. Trudy, the president can say nukes are off the table. Get lost in the weeds for hours. Cryotherapy. I'm going to have to look that one up, Joshua. I have to look that one up. Cryotherapy. You know, there was an episode of Star Trek where all of these people were found floating in cryostasis. You had a plutocrat, you had a pilot, and I forget the other two. And the plutocrat ends up having a conversation with Picard. And Picard is trying to make this point to him. Once you're beyond need, like once you've gotten to the point where your civilization is beyond this thing of need, you have the capacity to make sure your needs are met. You are able to live your life in the way that you want to live your life. And the plutocrat fundamentally did not understand that, saying, well, how on earth, what do you have to strive for? I mean, what do you have to fight for? What do you have to, to live for? And Picard, looking at him, as you look at a caveman and try to explain to the caveman how the cell phone works, tries to make this point to him, you understand that your financial system is a subset of the real world. And this idea that you might be doing magnificently well, but a large part of your population, even if they're making ends meet, are slave wage jobs where they're just running on a hamster wheel just to make ends meet. That's not a life. It's not life. Once the society grew up and became rational, and the society said, what do we want to spend our time doing? And the people said, whatever we want. Survival was met. Your basic needs of survival were met. Your time was your own. What most people found was people still worked. They just worked on the things that they wanted and cared about. You still had physicists, you still had doctors, you still had teachers. Think of a society where the majority of the population have the capacity to go to school when they want. Think of an Earth Well, let's say you had 7 billion people on the planet, and each and every one of those people had access to a decent quality education to the extent that they wanted an education. How many doctorate degrees do you get if you open up the schools and tell people that they can go to school for as long as they want? And what does the civilization look like when you have all of these people that can be self-actualized because their basic needs were met? If you're talking about freedom, or you're talking about ripping the chains off from the standpoint of production and growth and human endeavors, you can't do it any other way. Like what Star Trek is doing in that Star Trek model of saying, make sure people's needs are met. And the moment that people's needs are met, allow those people to be unchained and free to go about their affairs. And what you will find is you're releasing the chains. I mean, cash is one of those things that holds back. It's not the freeing section of this. I understand. I know people think this, but you end up with this issue of kind of trust where you have all the resources to do pretty much whatever you want. If the country came together and said, you know what, we want a hyperloop. We want a maglev hyperloop that goes from Richmond, Virginia to San Francisco, California. You have all the resources in the world to do it. What you may not have necessarily is the capital to do it. The resources exist. The technical acumen exists. The people who want it exists. Your society itself has not matured enough, however, to come up with a way to actually do it. There's something wrong with your society. But there's all sorts of stuff in that way. Healthcare, all these. You have all the resources and technical acumen to make sure that each and every person on this planet have the basic things that they need. Just the wealth on last year alone was enough to get rid of poverty 7 times over. Your issue here isn't poverty, it isn't scarcity, it's not technical acumen. None of those things are your issue. Your issue is the way people perceive those things. And to some degree, just a flamboyant amount of greed based in the way the system incentivizes people in an odd way to be greedy. In the same way, Kim Jong-un was born and raised in a society that groomed Kim Jong-un to be the horrible person that Kim Jong-un is. It's the same way that your society groomed Donald Trump to be the horrible person that Donald Trump is. We allow ourselves to be groomed in this way, to be limited by the factors that are in our society. We need to grow up. We need to become rational. And I mean rational from the standpoint of taking care of our environment, because without an environment, there is no person. There's no such thing as humanity without an environment for humanity to exist in. And looking at human beings as being the most precious thing on the planet, because the human beings are the most precious thing on the planet. It is a magnificently valuable resource that we allow to go to waste, squandering in poverty, dropping french fries, flipping hamburgers, driving taxes. There's nothing wrong with those jobs per se if you're trying to make ends meet. I'm just making a point that poverty is not something we should allow in our society. Period. If there is one billionaire, there should be no person in poverty. And personally, I don't think there should be any billionaires. So, I mean, put mine further to the left and most. President cannot say nukes are off the table. Trudy. Why not? He's a president of the United States. He can say whatever he wants. Why not? Are you telling me that if you're having a conversation with North Korea and you know as a flat fact that there is no way you're going to drop nukes on North Korea, that North Korea, many of those missiles that they fire off fall into the sea, are magnificently incompetent in trying to go about their affairs, you can very well say nukes are off the table, seeing as you can blow them away just through basic means. I'll give you another example. It's one thing if another country has nuclear weapons that are being aimed and used on you. It's one thing if the other country is being the aggressor. It's not the situation we find ourselves. It's, come on, Trudy. I mean, you can understand that it's. We dropped a nuclear weapon on Japan under very suspicious circumstances. We're in a war. Fair enough. We didn't necessarily ask for that war. Fair enough. Roosevelt and the public didn't want to get into that war. Or Roosevelt wanted to get into the war, but the public didn't want to get into that war. Japan drops a bomb on us. Roosevelt declares war. Fair enough. Roosevelt wanted to get into the war. This gave Roosevelt the pretext to get into the war. Actually, not just that. It gave Roosevelt the pretext to declare war on Japan. The moment that Hitler, after dropping the bomb, declared war on America, well, at that point, it gave Roosevelt the pretext to declare war on Germany. Something that he wanted to do anyway, most likely. Japan had lost. The United States had made the assumption, and correctly, that the moment that you take out Germany, Japan was a weaker partner in this, and that Japan couldn't necessarily maintain itself. And they were right. Now, part of them being right was at the moment that the Russians had organized themselves, because mind you, whatever the United States wants to say from the standpoint of propaganda on how well the United States did in that war, we did. We did amazing things in that war. We converted what was a private enterprise or enterprises into a war-making machine. We ended up with two armadas of sorts on two sides of the globe at the exact same time, in addition to funneling the war effort or fueling the war effort from the standpoint of materials to the other countries who were our allies. We did an amazing fucking thing. Now, that being said, who won the war, however, was Russia. Not by themselves. It was all of us. It was Britain's finest hour. It's perfectly right, but Britain was in dire straits in that war. But they held the line until other support was able to pull and gather their resources. France was taken over right off the bat. Shreven plan, I believe they call it. They didn't even think that they could pull that off, so France kind of just ignored the fact that they could do that particular military procedure, the same procedure that they did in World War One. But I'm getting on tangent. Japan had put out feelers to try to come to some resolution of peace. Truman, at this point, was in office. We built the goddamn thing. We might as well drop it. And that little, disgusting little man decided that despite knowing that they were putting out peace feelers, that he was going to drop that nuclear bomb anyway. Partially, we built it, so might as well drop it. But also partially was, we're going to show the Soviets what we can do. Right off the bat, even before that war was over with, Truman, so was Churchill, still thinking about from the standpoint of the Soviet Union being our enemies at the end of that war. I'm making a point to you that we shouldn't have dropped that bomb in the first place. The Russians attacked Japan, and for the most part, Japan was falling apart. There was no way Japan was even going to be able to stay in that war. We knew they were putting out peace feelers. We dropped that bomb anyway. If it was imprecise and uncouth to drop that bomb then, while we were literally in the middle of a conflict, and while they could at least make a fig leaf of an argument that we don't necessarily want our people going from island to island and number of deaths and everything else. You can make that case. You can make that argument. What is the argument for putting nuclear weapons on the table now? That's what I don't get. And I don't understand why the president, even if nuclear weapons are on the table, have to explicitly say that they're on the table. I'm saying it's unnecessary, Trudy. I disagree with you. Stalin starved 30 million Ukrainians. Jin Kare. Fair enough, yeah. The United States planned to drop the atomic bomb regardless of what Japan did because they left two cities untouched by conventional bombs so that they could see the full devastation. Order of chaos, yes. Yeah. Civil disobedience. The United States strategy was that nuclear weapons were useless unless the world knew they were crazy enough to use it. Civil disobedience. That was then, but I'm talking about now. I'm talking about this argument that Donald Trump should have kept nuclear weapons on the table. I'm saying you don't need to say it. Even if it's true that you're doing it, the very act that you're using it in phraseology and bringing it up draws eyes to that word, and it makes you seem off your rocker. That's all. A dingo ate my baby. I'm psychic. Fucking A, dingo ate my baby. Japan wanted peace, a piece of China. Japan did. Have you seen, one of those things, sometimes it's hard to, if you don't know the historical context, sometimes you can miss it. Old Japanese flicks or Chinese movies. Like, there's an old movie by Jet Li where you're getting into this thing of Japanese and China, the conflict between those two. It is fascinating. like it's a good movie from the standpoint of martial arts and everything else, but there's a historical context to the movie that as Americans sometimes you miss it because you don't necessarily know what was taking place during the time. But being that it was set in this kind of period piece, you get to see how vicious Japan was towards China. I mean, this was amazing. Rape of Nanjing. Yeah. It was horrid. The MAD policy is still in effect. We intentionally cultivate an image of being crazy and willing to use nukes. Garden, I feel you, but you can imagine that if the President of the United States uses it in its phraseology, it's pretty problematic. Like, yes, Nixon wanted to seem like a crazy man. Who was the other guy? It wasn't Eisenhower. It was somebody else. Truman threatened to use nukes in other situations. The United States military even talked about using like a portable nuclear device, which is ridiculous. Like, you know, like a hand nuclear cannon. Some of this stuff was weird and so bizarre. So bizarre. Fist of Legends and Fearless. God damn it. How do you guys know this stuff? How do you guys know this stuff? IP Man was dope. Yeah, agreed. Alright. The nukes in Japan were directed towards Stalin's advance on Japan's islands. Jap islands is so racist, but I know what you mean. Japan's islands. Harry Robinson. And I'm joking about my wife and I. We use that things like somebody says something about somebody's like being homophobic. It's like, God, that guy's being racist. Japan helped the Western powers in the Boxers' Rebellion. Ruben Garcia. Harriet Harnett. The Japanese did germ warfare on live Chinese people. Yes. Yeah, they were vicious in China. What I do know of Japan's foray into China, I know they were vicious. McCarthy and Curtis LeMay wanted to nuke North Korea. George C. You know, the wild part about that is Japan didn't necessarily see a major difference between the bombings of, like, the fire bombings versus the nuclear bombings. During the time, you know, Japan's houses like paper and wood and so forth, and some of the techniques that they were using for the bombings were fire bombings. Well, in one of the firebombing campaigns, they killed like 100,000 people in one of those campaigns. Robert McNamara was one of the people working and constructing those bombing missions and bombing campaigns. I would say look up Robert McNamara's I can't think of the name of the movie, but he has a famous film where he talks about the things that he did in his past that he wished he would have done differently and his life lessons learned. It's one of the best films I've ever seen from the standpoint of politics. It's awesome. It's really, really good. Japan experimented on humans in China like Nazis did. Yeah, they were rough. They were rough. Yes, they did horrible human experiments on Manchurian citizens, guarding them. Yeah. The United States Army did germ warfare on their own troops. Harlan St. Clair. Yes, they did. They were testing stuff on us, on the troops. They also did experimental warfare, like on LSD, on American citizens. Eisenhower, so did Britain, by the way. Britain tested chemical warfare from pouring down inside their own tunnels to see how those things would be dispersed if there was a chemical attack. Yeah, Britain is not the only population that used chemical weapons on their own civilian populations. Wesley Walker Jr. I didn't know there was an IP man without Danny Yen. See, I haven't seen all the IP men, so I can't talk about that one. What is scary, Japan is rewriting its history books. Their school books ignore the Japanese war on China. Burn Buchholz. We do the same thing. When conservatives are in those states and conservatives are trying to have certain textbooks that are a certain view of America, when you're reading the textbooks and it's talking about Native Americans, have you noticed it kind of glosses over that part? It's like Thanksgiving, us and the Native Americans, this red man with no clothes on reaches his hand out, and this other white man with a bunch of clothes on reaches his hand out, shake their hands, they're like, yes, let's have some turkey, let's have some fucking turkey. And they eat their turkey and their drumsticks, and they're happy, and the Native Americans help them plant corn, and the world is great, and the world is lovely, and this was this kumbaya moment, and the world, oh, it was awesome. We went hand in hand in the sun. Well, clearly that didn't happen. We massacred and committed a genocide on this population. We literally committed genocide. That's not in the textbooks. That's hidden. In the same way, Turkey rewrites their history to make it look as if they didn't have the Armenian genocide. And like you said, Japanese is doing the same. We do the same. We do the same. Come on, let's be honest. The bigger the nation, the larger their atrocities. That's what it seems like, doesn't it, Civil? That is what it seems like. Trudy, I love you to death. Hopefully there's no, bad feelings. And part of the thing I love about the audience is that we can disagree and we kind of bump heads on this stuff, but not in a bad way, of course. But I do disagree with you on that one, Trudy. Ray Foley, oh, thank you, Ray. Leave a comment, Ray. Leave a comment. I like it when you guys leave comments. Even if I disagree with the comments, I like it when you leave comments. All right. I'm going to end this because, again, I have a bunch of others that I want to do today, and I don't want to get too bogged down. I have one on Boris Johnson, when Boris Johnson just being a little bit more honest than Boris Johnson need to be honest. And, yeah, I have a few that I need to do today. So I will see you guys shortly. Maybe 30 minutes. I'm probably going to take a lunch break, take the dogs out, and check on my wife. She's working remotely now. And so my schedule is probably going to be organized around her schedule because she gets up a hell of a lot earlier than I do. So I will see you guys shortly, probably about 30-40 minutes. Thank you guys for showing up. If you enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe, and of course, you guys can always support the Patreon. Thanks, everyone. Great conversation, by the way. Great conversation. Thanks, guys.